It's a very short story in the Bible. It's very, very short indeed. And we just find Jesus, I think it's just about 12 or 15 words he actually says in that particular story. But I wanted to tell you that particular story. And I have to be honest with you, Mike, as you're setting up the camera right there, I was a bit confused and almost, just scratching my head, Elder Darlington, about why is this story even in the Bible? What relevance does it have in terms of the plan of salvation or redemption story? What was really the point of putting this particular story in the Bible? But maybe like me, you will find that this is a really wonderful story. The story of Jesus and his first trip to not his first trip, but the first record of his trip to Jerusalem Passover when he became a teenager. And that's where I want to start my story this morning, when Jesus became a teenager. Jesus, in Jewish custom, the Jewish boys and girls would have a special prayer read for them in church when they become 12 years old, between 12 and 13 years old. And I do understand that's quite cultural, because I know when I was about 13 years old, my parents had a special birthday party for me now when I was 13 years old. Now that you can think for yourself, you're going to have a special birthday party. And so when Jesus was about 12 years old, he came to church with his parents that day, and arrangements had already been made in church for the pastor to say a special prayer for Jesus now that he was 12 years old. And so Jesus at the appropriate time was brought to the platform, and in the town church that Jesus belonged to in Nazareth, Jesus was welcomed to the platform, and he was introduced to all of the other church members there. And you can see that the other parents in the village, that in the town, that knew Jesus and Jesus' family, were all very pleased to see that Jesus had arrived at the age of 12. And the pastor said so many kind things about Jesus, the way that he was participating in Sabbath school and in Adventurers and Pathfinders as he had been growing up, and that he was very pleased that Jesus was now at this turning point in his life, a transitional point between childhood and adolescence. And so the whole congregation was asked to pray, and as they closed their eyes, Jesus closed his eyes as well, and the pastor began to pray, and he said many things in his prayer, counsel for Jesus to continue to study the word of God and to pray every day. And there was one part of the prayer that stuck out in Jesus' mind. It was a part of the prayer where the pastor said, and now that Jesus can think for himself, he's now responsible for his own choices. Now that Jesus can think for himself, he's now responsible for his own choices. And even while he was in prayer, that kind of word, that little sentence that the pastor preached, stuck in the back of his mind. And right there while Jesus was praying, he said to himself, I wonder what the pastor means when he says, now that I can think for myself, I'm responsible for my own choices. Anyway, after church, Jesus walked home with his friends. When your boys growing up in the villages, in the countryside, you know everybody in the village. They know you. Parents know everybody. And so when the boys are walking home together, their parents feel quite happy for them to do so. And as the boys walked home together, they talk about everything. Elder Darlington, I don't have to tell you, they talk about everything under the sun, from the birds flying in the trees to the color of the grass and everything and everything and everything. And as they were walking together home, suddenly the conversation turned to the way that they as boys had been changing even over the course of that particular summer. In that particular group that Jesus was walking home with on that particular day, they had all grown about 4, 5, 6 inches that particular summer. And they were noticing, some some of them said, some of them had grown really tall and lanky. Some of them had lost a little bit of belly fat and had started to grow muscles and everything. And some of them realized that that they weren't growing in perfect proportion. Some of them realized that their feet seemed to be very big compared to the rest of their body, or their hands seemed to be massive, or when they looked in the mirror, they noticed that maybe their ears seemed to be a little bit bigger, or their nose seemed to be a little bit bigger. But they were all recognizing that they were growing. And, as well as some of these physical features, most of the boys, in fact, all of the boys, realized that they had all started to grow a little caterpillar across the top of their lip. You know the one, don't you, Elder George? You know that little caterpillar and not only across the top of their lip, Elder Nambo, but down the side of their cheek just here. Do you remember when that one happened? Yeah. And you growing all this under chin beard and everything, all of that business there. So all of these boys recognized that they were changing and things were happening in their bodies. And one of the most obvious things that were changing Eddie, one of the most obvious things that were changing is that sometimes their voices would be pitched up. And even in the same sentence, sometimes even in the same word, their voices would be pitched up and then it will be down here. Sometimes their voice would be up in the attic and then the next minute is down in the basement. And all the boys, they were just laughing together as they were walking home and noticing all of these differences that were happening in the changing of their bodies and that. And then all of a sudden, these boys realized that they, just as the boys were walking on this side of the road in a little group of teenage boys all walking home together, they realized that Sister Ida and Sister Lydia, they realized that there was a similar group of girls walking on the other side of the road. And the boys started to blush as they looked at the girls on the other side of the road. And it became noticeable that the boys at that age were all sticking together in one little group. And all the girls who were going through similar kind of changes in their physique as well were all in another group on the other side of the road. And for the first time, I don't know what happened, but Jesus and all of his friends, they'd grown up with all of these girls in church. They'd grown up with all of these girls in the town and in the village. And yet, they really never noticed that they were girls before. I don't know how that managed to happen. But suddenly, as teenagers, they recognized that they were girls. And not only were they growing up, but some of these girls had started to grow curves on their body, okay? And in as much as the boys found it very easy and very comfortable to talk to one another as boys about some of the things that were going on, they find it very awkward all of a sudden to talk to the girls. I don't know why that should be. Elder Nambo, do you know why that should be? Okay. And so there was this kind of awkwardness socially. They found it kind of awkward to talk to one another all of a sudden, and found it kind of difficult to talk to one another all of a sudden. And then one of the boys said, I like that girl over there, she got such a lovely smile. And then one of the other boys said, I like the other one, the one that's right next to her. She's got such beautiful eyes and that, And as the boys kind of peeped as they were walking over, they all realized that they were attracted to the girls. Okay? And that evening when Jesus got home and, after supper, he went to bed, and as he laid down and started to think about some of the discussion and the conversation that he'd had with the other guys as they were walking home, he realized that, now that he was 12 years old, now that he had become an adolescent, he was going through some physical changes in his life. He was growing, he was transitioning between childhood and adulthood in this period of time. And not only physically, but he also hormonally as well. He was now just as attracted to the girls as any of the other guys in the village, but all of that social awkwardness and everything. And Jesus realized that while it was kind of awkward, it was also natural, and that this is something that at that age, everybody, even their own parents, go through in life. And so Jesus just recognized that these were just, even though that it was a tricky period of time, it was just a normal process that he was going through along with everyone else. Anyway, a few months passed by, and Jesus and his parents told Jesus that, look, it's coming up to Passover time, and every year every Hebrew family, every Hebrew male is due to go down to Jerusalem and to spend Pentecost to spend Passover down in Jerusalem. So the next day after Sabbath, the following day, they would pack their tents and they would go down as a family down to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover in Jerusalem. So next morning, they packed their camp, they packed their tents, they packed their cooking stoves and all the rest of it, sleeping bags. It was an 80-mile journey from Nazareth in the north down to Jerusalem in the south, and they didn't have a coach to take them, so they would have to walk the distance, and they would have to set up camp every night that they were doing so. And again, Jesus met up with his friends, and Mary and Joseph, they knew everybody in the group that they were walking with, so they were quite happy for Jesus to walk with the other boys and to spend time with them during the course of the day, but as long as they were home for supper in the evening, okay? As long as they were home for supper in the evening. So off Jesus went, and he was spending his time, his days with his friends, all walking towards Jerusalem together as friends. And as they were walking, again, they were talking about everything under the sun. And as they were walking, they stopped for lunch. And as they stopped for lunch, then Nathan said to them, listen, guys, I don't know about you guys, but I don't know what to do with my parents at the moment, I don't know what to do with them. They keep asking me, how am I getting on with my studies at home? How am I getting on with my studies at church and at school and everything? And they keep saying to me, you need to do well at school so that you can go to college. And then when you've done well at college, you go to university, and you do well at university, and then you can become a doctor, or you can become a solicitor, or you can become a lawyer. And I said, and Nathan said to me, I don't know what's going on. I said, it is my plan to do well at school. I want to do well at school. I want to go to college. I want to complete my O's and my A's and do well and then go on to university. But who told my parents that I want to be a doctor? Who told them that I wanted to be a solicitor or a lawyer? Who told them that? I said, I'm not even sure in my own self what I want to be when I'm that age, but at least let me have the choice of making my own mind up of what I'm going to be. But, it almost comes across as though they're trying to live their dreams out in my life, okay? Anyway, so Joshua, we all had a good laugh at that one. Joshua and Jesus and all of his friends had a really good laugh over the situation that Nathan was finding at home. But then Joshua spoke up, and Joshua said, hey, you think that's funny? He said, what about my parents? He said, I was at home the other day, and I said to my parents, well, look, why do we go to church every week? Okay, I asked them the question, why do we go to church every week? And immediately my parents said, immediately my parents said to me, what do you mean you don't want to go to church? I said, I didn't say I didn't want to go to church. I said, why do we go to church every week? And they turned around to me and said, look, if we're going to church, you're going to church too. He said, just because you're growing hair on your lip don't mean that you're a big man and you can talk to me like that and question us as your parents. I said, I only want to find out, why are you going to church? And then they said to me, listen, enough of your rudeness and your back chat. If we're going to church, you're going to church too. And there's only room for one man in this house, and it's not you. I thought, we all cracked up laughing. As young, Jesus and all of his friends, we all cracked up laughing at the idea that, that Joshua was just asking a simple question, why are we going to church? And his parents, instead of just answering the question, anyway, we all had a good laugh about that. They all had a good laugh about that. And that evening again, when Jesus got home after supper, Jesus lay down on his bed and he started to reflect on some of the things that the boys had spoken about that day. And he recognized that, there are some parents who just struggle with the idea that their children are transitioning between childhood and adolescence, okay? They just struggle with the whole idea. They take it that to ask them a question is to challenge their authority. The young person isn't challenging anyone's authority, but they just take it in that manner. Anyway, so, there are some parents who really just struggle and they don't seem to grasp the idea that their son or their daughter will always be their son or their daughter, but they won't always be children. And as they come into 12, 13, 14 years, they are transitioning between childhood and adulthood. Anyways, a couple of 3 days later, they arrive in Jerusalem for the Passover, and Jesus was just with all of the other guys taken by the big sights of the city. Jerusalem compared to Nazareth is like what, early compared to London. Okay, it's a much different and bigger place, and of course, at that time of the year, all of the families in Israel are coming together to celebrate the Passover, And so the whole city is bustling with people, and people can't even sleep in Jerusalem. They have to camp in tents outside of Jerusalem. Anyway, Jesus went to the temple with his parents on the Sabbath to worship together. And of course, on this Passover, they're reading the story of Moses and the Exodus from Egypt. And as Jesus listened to the story of Moses and the Exodus from Egypt, all of a sudden, for the first time, Jesus realized that in his imagination, he can picture the whole scene. I mean, properly picture everything that's going on. And not only picture the whole scene, but he could actually put himself in the place of Moses and ask himself, if I was Moses, would I have the courage to stand up for right against wrong? Would I have the courage to stand up to the Pharaoh, the king of the country, when he doesn't even recognize who I am? Would I have the faith in God to put myself in that situation? And not only was Jesus able to ask these particular questions, Jesus then started to ask himself other questions. What are the challenges that I face in my life? Even in my own situation, am I able to have the courage to stand for right, even in the middle of wrong? Do I have the faith in God to be able to stand up in these situations. And it was right there, as Jesus listened to the story, as Jesus put himself into the story, into the picture, that all of a sudden, Jesus saw himself as part of God's plan. As a young person, just 12 years old, he began to see his place in God's plan. And he realized that God had a plan for his life. And as Jesus thought about it, he saw for himself the first time the love, the care, and the kindness of God that brought his people out of slavery and into the land of freedom. For the first time, Jesus began to see that the 10 commandments were not just 10 rules, but they were 10 moral laws that applied to everyone, so that everyone could treat one another with respect and dignity. And that God in heaven did not treat this people better than that people, but that his love was for all people, no matter where they came from and no matter what they look like. And right there, in the middle of this sermon that was being preached that Sabbath morning, Jesus prayed and he accepted the Father into his life. He accepted God's plan for his life, and he accepted the fact that he was accountable to God in a way that he had not been accountable before. That evening he went home, and as he lay on his bed, he realized that he was now able to think for himself, and that he was now responsible for the choices that he was making in his life. And because of that, he was no longer accountable to his parents in the same way that he was accountable to them as a child. But now that he had accepted the fact that he had a place in God's plan, now that he accepted the fact that he was an individual in his own right, with his own identity, that he was accountable to the God of heaven in the same way that every adult is responsible to the God of heaven. And again, Jesus prayed. And he prayed for the strength to be able to live the way that God wanted him to live, and to be the person that God wanted him to be. Anyways, the next day, Joseph and Mary woke up and they said, right, we're going to be heading back home today. And so they had to pack all of the tents again and pack all of the cooking utensils. And then they left on their journey from Jerusalem to go back up to Nazareth. And, they didn't see Jesus in the course of the day after he had helped them to pack up the tent and everything. So they didn't see Jesus for the rest of the day. So they just assumed that he was with all of the other young men of his age. And so they didn't look for him too much, but they expected him home at supper. And when he didn't come home at supper time, Then they started to ask questions. Well, if he's not here with us, then where is he? So he started to ask questions all around the camp, and nobody had seen Jesus for the day. So anyway, Mary and Joseph, as you would expect, they get really worried and stressed out about the fact that they can't find Jesus. And so the next day they head back down to Jerusalem. There was a day's walk coming out, day's walk going back to Jerusalem. So on the third day that they're in Jerusalem now, they're looking all over Jerusalem. And one of the first places they look, in actual fact, is the temple. They go to the temple. And to their heart's relief, they find Jesus at the temple. Not distressed and hiding in a corner crying, but right in the middle of the Bible study. And he's asking the wise men, the elders of the church, he's asking them questions. And the elders are so surprised by the answers that he's given that they're asking him questions. And so the Bible study is going on. And Mary and Joseph, they're just relieved in their heart that they've found Jesus. Anyways, they call Jesus over and they say to him, Jesus. You can imagine the mother, Mary, hugging and embracing Jesus in that moment. But Jesus, don't you know that we've been looking for you? Don't you know how stressed out and anxious we've been looking for you for these last 3 days? And Jesus just turned to them and said, but why are you looking for me? Don't you know? Why are you looking for me? Don't you know that I should be about my Father's business? Well, even the answer that Jesus gave there kind of confused Mary and Joseph. They didn't know what to make of that particular answer. But anyway, they were just so glad to see Jesus that they said, look, let's just get on our road and get back up to home to Nazareth as quickly as we can. And that evening, Mary and Joseph are in the tent, and this time they're the ones who can't go to sleep. They're talking to each other about what had happened and just those few words that Jesus had said to them at the temple. And they realized that when Jesus had spoken to them, he spoke to them identifying himself as me and I. And he spoke about them as you. And he spoke about his relationship with the God of heaven as my Father in heaven. And it was very confusing for Joseph and Mary. They didn't really know what to make of what Jesus had said. But one thing they did realize is this, that their little man was now growing up. Their little man could now think for himself and make choices for himself. And their little man had now formed his own relationship with the God of heaven. And they realized that as parents, teenagers must grow. And their job as a parent is to provide the space for the teenager to grow up in. And the only way that they could do that as a parent is that they must take a little step back. They must give Jesus the space to grow, and as he grows, they must take a little space back. They can't expect to say to Jesus, you can now think to yourself, for yourself. You are now responsible for your own choices. They can't expect for Jesus to behave in a grown-up and mature manner, and yet they as parents are still treating him as a child. They have to make space for Jesus to grow. And so they went back to Nazareth, and I'm sure that there were many other instances where Joseph and Mary could see Jesus growing and growing in himself as an individual before he became a fully grown man. Well, Reading West, that's my story for today. I hope you actually like my story. you can see that the actual bit in the Bible is a very small bit, and I have to frame up the story from my own experiences and from the experiences of others around me as well. But I'd like to say this to the young people who are here at church and also at home. It's a very, I think those of us who are adults, please don't think badly of us. Eddie and you guys sitting in the back there, don't think badly of us as your parents and as adults in the church. Do consider that when we were your age, we went through exactly the same issues that you are going through now. Is that right, Elder Nambo? Yeah, Elder Nambo says yes, so it must be true, okay? But in the middle of this, I remember, I remember some issues when I was a teenager myself, Elder Darlington, and I'm almost frightened to mention some of those issues, if I'm honest with you. Trust me, Sister Ida, I'm not going to. But the one thing I would, looking back at my own experiences and talking to you today, I would say to you that, as young people, you can't expect your parents to treat you with respect or to treat you as a mature adult if you're behaving like a child. Okay? So you yourself need to think through your own growth as a young person. And you're moving out of childhood and you're moving towards adulthood. No one's expecting you to be an old man overnight. You have to go through the same process. And that process involves you asking questions. And let me say right now, young people, if you've got 100 questions to ask your 100 questions, because I know that when I was going through that, I had to find my own identity and my own individuality. And the only way that I could do that was by asking questions. And I remember putting my own parents on the spot on more than one occasion. Now, at the same time, parents, let me say to you guys that when young people come to you with their hundreds of questions, as they will, Elder Single, as young people come to you, even as head elder, with their hundreds of questions, they're not being rude. They're not being disrespectful. They're not answering back. They are simply trying to work out for themselves who they are. They may have been coming to church for 12, 13, 14, 15 years, but that doesn't mean that they've worked out these questions for themselves. So when they come, don't think that they're being rude, and don't lay into them because you think that they're challenging you. If they are challenging behaviors, then deal with challenging behavior by all means. But if they're simply asking questions, as parents, let's take the time to sit down and talk through some of the questions that our young people have. Because don't take it for granted that because they've been coming to church for 12 years that they know all the answers. Because trust me, I was sent to church when I was a child. And those of you who know what I mean when I say that will understand that I didn't want to be there. I was there because I was forced into a car on a Sabbath morning to come to church. But that's not to say that things that were said in church didn't go into my brain, and that I was able to work out of those things later on. So, young people and adults alike, adolescence is a very interesting time for both the young person and for the adult. And we need to make space for one another, because I think one of the goals or one of the achieved things that we want to achieve is what Joseph and Mary achieved. They allowed Jesus to grow, to become his own person, and get his own identity and to be able to make wise choices. And a big part of all of those wise choices was to know that he had a place in God's plan. And one of the things that I believe all of us as parents want our young people to know is that they have a place in God's plan. And that the highest achievement in life is not a certificate on the wall saying PhD. That's not the highest achievement in life. The highest achievement in life, no matter what job you end up doing, is to know that you are doing what God wants you to do. Okay? So with that, I'm going to say amen. If I may have one more minute, Elder Single, can I have one more minute? Am I allowed? I'm going to start my stopwatch. And in the 1 minute that we have, I would like us to pray silently to ourselves, and to pray silently to ourselves, and to ask these two questions of ourselves. Two questions, 1 minute in silent prayer. The first question is this: what part of this story can I apply to my life? The second question is this: what part of this story can I share with a family or friend this week? So I'm going to give you 1 minute of quiet prayer and contemplation, and it's two questions. What part of this story can I apply to my life? And what part of this story can I share with others this week? And it's 1 minute beginning now. Amen. And God bless you all, Reading West.